Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president, and this is a pre-convention, pre-debate video message to the members of the Texas Libertarian Party. As I'm sure you all know, I didn't make the cut on your fundraising contest, and so therefore I won't be participating in your presidential debate at your state convention, and I'm very disappointed over that. I was really looking forward to coming down to Corpus Christi and sharing with you my perspectives on this presidential race in the context of a debate against my other opponents. So I figured that the next best thing I can do is to create this video message and post it on YouTube and on my campaign website at jacobforliberty.com to share with you what I would have said if I had been permitted to participate in that debate. At the recent Colorado debate, the first question out the chute by the moderators was, what do you consider is the primary issue in this presidential race for this nomination? And I said that the biggest issue is, what is the message that the members of the Libertarian Party want to be carried by their presidential candidate in the 2024 election? It has long been my conviction that the mission of the Libertarian Party is to lead America to freedom. That's our job. And in the process, garner a large number of votes. Well, with respect to the votes, we know that for the last 20 years or so, this message that has become the standard message cannot garner votes. It's incapable of garnering votes. 3 years ago, the standard message garnered 1.1%. And then right now, the latest presidential poll has us at 0%. There's actually a zero next to Libertarian Party, which is indicating that 100% or close to 100% of the electorate is not interested in voting for our presidential candidate that carries this message that has come to really define the party for the last 25 years, also defined our presidential candidacies. And I have a confession to make. It's one that I make at every convention, that I'm with the 100%. I reject this message as much as they do. It's a bad message. And I've felt like this for 20, 25 years. It's a message that is inconsistent with our self-imposed mantra, label of the party of principle. It's also inconsistent with the core principle of libertarianism, the non-aggression principle, and inconsistent with the pledge that we all take not to support the initiation of force. Now, what is this message? Well, it's an amalgam of three factors: libertarian socialism, Republican light, and serfdom reform. Let me give you some specific examples. Social Security. Social Security is the crown jewel of American socialism. It was imported into America from socialists in Germany, where the concept originated. It was brought into existence in the 1930s under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It really transformed America's economic system into what we call a welfare state. And they don't call it Social Security for nothing. It's a socialist program. It uses the initiation of force to take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people. And this is the support of this socialist program has really become a defining feature of our presidential campaigns for the last at least 20 years. At the South Carolina Libertarian Party convention, most of my opponents just took me to task vociferously for calling for the immediate repeal of this socialist program. Now, why do I call for the immediate repeal? Well, because you're not free under socialism. I want to be free. And that's one of the reasons I'm in this movement. I want to be free in my lifetime, not 25 or 50 years from now. And you can't be free when you're living under socialism. And like I say, this is a massive socialist program, as we all know. And so my opponents in the South Carolina debate, and ever since, have taken me to task for my lack of care and compassion, that I don't want to continue this program. Well, there is no care or compassion in this program. It's based on the initiation of force. The IRS steals money from one group of people and gives it to another group of people. That's not care and compassion. It's always easy to be good and caring with money stolen from other people, but that's not genuine care and compassion. Genuine care and compassion comes from the willing heart of the individual. Parents, children, and grandchildren honoring mother and father and grandparents on a voluntary basis with their own money, their own resources, their time, their effort. The churches of America are filled with people that are faith-filled, that would be more than willing to help out others in need and are willing to do so. Neighborhood groups, charitable groups. And I contend that it is up to our party to lead America toward the restoration of our sound founding principles of freedom and free markets and voluntary charity. My opponents say, oh, but there's been a fund that people have put their money into. There's a contract. There exists no such thing. Social Security from the very beginning has been a standard welfare state program, no different from food stamps and public housing. Nobody puts their money into a fund. Everybody pays taxes, but those are just taxes. They go into the general revenue. They're spent as upon receipt. It's a straight socialist program. It takes money from one group of people and gives it to another group of people. I can guarantee you that the first person that took Social Security, I think her name was Ida Mae Fuller, she had not put any money in. She had not paid any taxes. She just started receiving checks. It's a plunder and a looting system. And it's a bad message for this party because it violates our core principle. It violates the idea of a party of principle when we're advocating something that violates our core principle. And again, it's up to us to lead America to freedom. So this is one of the big differences that would have certainly risen there and if I'd been in your debate there in Texas. Also, Medicare. Medicare and Medicaid destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. We had low, stable prices. Hardly anyone even had major medical insurance because they didn't need it. Going to the doctors was like going to the grocery store. And then Medicare and Medicaid are adopted in the 1960s by Lyndon Johnson, who had become president, and this destroyed everything. I mean, this is the reason for the soaring healthcare crisis and the skyrocketing prices. And there's only one solution to this, and that's to repeal Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, get rid of these socialist programs. But the defining principle of the party for the last 20 years in our presidential campaigns is, oh no, Jacob, we got to keep these programs intact. That's the way we're going to get respectable people to vote for us. And so they come up with these health savings accounts or something called direct medical care, a reform that is supposedly going to fix the system. Well, the reform never fixes the system. No reform will ever fix socialism because it's an inherently defective paradigm. And then there's school vouchers that many of my opponents favor. It's become a defining feature of the party. The Libertarian Party hierarchy sends out fundraising letters asking for money to promote school vouchers. The latest one I got was taking over the public school system, getting libertarians elected to school boards. Well, this is a disaster. I mean, school vouchers are nothing more than a socialist reform measure that takes money from one group of people through taxation, the initiation of force, and gives it to another group of people to fund their children's education. It's just straight socialism. And then public schooling itself is a massive socialist program at the local level. And so here, libertarians advocating the continuation of these massive socialist programs. And my opponents favor, they call it school choice or school vouchers. And it's not surprising, they're just going with the flow that has become the flow in the party. And yet, there it is. A violation of the non-aggression principle, a violation of the pledge we take. There's only one freedom solution to education, and that's separate school and state. Get government entirely out of education. And now we're talking about genuine educational freedom. The same thing with respect to religious liberty, where we separated church and state. And that's the case we should be taking to the American people. And then there's immigration controls. There's another example. There's multiple examples, but all of my opponents in this race are going with the flow, which has been there for at least 20 years, to support America's system of immigration controls, which is a socialist system. It's based on the socialist principle of central planning. The government plans the movements of millions upon millions of people across borders, an entirely peaceful act. When you cross a border, you're not initiating force, you're not violating anybody's rights, but the government interdicts there with its plan of central planning. And as Ludwig von Mises pointed out, central planning always brings planned chaos. Well, what better term to describe what we've had on the border for 80 years? I mean, this thing is not new. It's been going on for many, many decades. And planned chaos, what better term could you use? Perpetual crisis, maybe, along with death, suffering, humiliation, rapes, kidnapping, a massive police state with highway checkpoints and warrantless searches of ranches and farms along the border and within 100 miles of the border, roving border patrol checkpoints, concertina wire, a Berlin Wall. There's people in the party here that are trying to put us on the same page as the Republican Party, and so that we're all in this together. Well, the Democratic Party too. They favor immigration controls and border controls too. But let me tell you something. You already know that immigration controls in this socialist system are inconsistent with libertarianism because of the non-aggression principle. Like I say, when you drive, and we have open borders here in the United States, and when you're driving from one state to another state and you cross that border, you're not violating anybody's rights. You're not initiating force. And it's the same with international borders. But I'll tell you this, that here's another telltale sign that these people are absolutely wrong when they say that immigration controls are consistent with libertarianism. When you find a program that is bringing perpetual crisis, death, suffering, rapes, kidnappings, and a massive police state, automatically this is not a libertarian program, because libertarianism isn't that kind of philosophy. If it were, I wouldn't be involved in this movement. Libertarianism is the most glorious philosophy that mankind has ever come up with. It's a philosophy of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and the principles in the Declaration of Independence, vitality, harmony, morality, religious principles. That's what libertarianism is all about. Now, unfortunately, all of my opponents favor this. I'm the only one in this race that favors the only solution to this. And I've said this for 30 years. There is only one solution to the immigration morass, none other. There is no reform plan that will make this work, none. And that solution is open borders, the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders, the same way we have domestically here. You don't have border controls on the state borders. Same principle. It is the only solution to get rid of all the deaths, suffering, rapes, kidnappings, police state, and everything else. In fact, we're going to have a table there at your convention, and I invite y'all to come by and see it, because we got a new flyer we just put out. Because, some people think, oh, Jacob, open borders, it's just an esoteric pie-in-the-sky thing. Nonsense. We have a flyer now with 4 books where people are advocating open borders. There's my book that I co-edited some 30 years ago called The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. I co-edited with Richard Ebeling. Some of you may know him. He's a professor of economics at the Citadel, former president of the Foundation for Economic Education in New York, FEE, it's now in Atlanta, former Ludwig von Mises professor of economics at Hillsdale. He and I have been on the same page of open borders for more than 30 years. And then another book, brand new, one of the best books on immigration you'll ever read, The Case for Open Borders by John Washington, a journalist out of Tucson, addresses every single objection to open borders. It's a fantastic book. And then there's Brian Kaplan, a libertarian economics professor at George Mason, brilliant guy. That's one, I think, the best economics department in the country from a free market Austrian economics perspective. His book is called Open Borders. And then there's Jason Riley, a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. His book is entitled Let Them In, The Case for Open Borders. So this is the future. And here's the thing. My opponents say, oh, well, their position on immigration controls, and their supporters say this too. It's a big vote getter. Big vote getter. Really? Well, then how come our presidential candidate only got 1.1% 3 years ago? How come we're at 0%? Because clearly the electorate's expecting us to do the same thing we've been doing for 20 years, send out the same message, support immigration controls. And so it's obviously not a vote getter, and it's logical that it's not a vote getter. because every single right-wing proponent of immigration controls, and that's who they're targeting with school vouchers and immigration controls, is the right-wing Republicans, the Ron Paul voters. They're going to vote for Donald Trump without exception. There is no possibility that any right-wing proponent of immigration controls is going to vote for a Libertarian Party presidential candidate. Why would he waste his vote on the LP candidate? When it comes to immigration, Donald Trump is the real enchilada. Okay, there's no question about that. He's the guy that started the Berlin Wall and so forth. They're all going to vote for him. So it garners 0 votes for my opponents. Now take my position. And this is one of the greatest opportunities we could ever have in this party. At this point in time in history, we are being presented with an opportunity the likes of which may never come again, and to do some open field running in this campaign. There are millions upon millions of migrant families across America, Hispanic families predominantly, that have suffered the consequences of what's going on along the border. And even if they haven't felt it directly, are horrified by how people are being treated down there. Those are our voters. Those are my voters. That all they're looking for is leadership and a viable alternative. And that viable alternative, it's the only alternative, is open borders. We get in there and we make that case. That's what will propel us way out of this 0%. I continue to contend in this campaign that it is entirely possible to break into the polls at 10 to 15%. And open borders provides that opportunity, along with the drug war. I mean, the drug war I've repeatedly maintained is the most racist government program since segregation. Blacks have suffered the oppressiveness of this drug war disproportionately. And my hunch is that they feel sympathy toward people on the border because they've suffered and continue to suffer the oppressive nature of the federal government and its programs. Now, if it comes up there in the Texas debate, and I'm sure it will, given that Governor Abbott's there with his concertina wire and his big military encampment and so forth, it really won't be much of a debate because all of my opponents favor America's system of immigration controls. They're going with the flow. That doesn't make for much of a debate. I mean, they'll debate over their reform plans. They all have different reform plans, but fundamentally they share the same principle. And that's supporting immigration controls. At one end of the spectrum, you'll have Michael Rechtenwald. He'll give his standard answer, which is kind of gobbledygook. He says, "Well, I'm a firm believer in Hans Hermann Hoppe's immigration formulation theory of anarchy in a private property society that depends on invitation only." In these debates, I have to clarify what he really means by this gobbledygook, and what he really means is reflected in an article he wrote in a right-wing rag called Chronicles Magazine called "What Next for the Right?" You can Google it; it's online. And what he said in that article, he was counseling Republicans, and he says to save his country, we need to seal the border. So he's a Trumpista when it comes to immigration. Seal the border. That means the military. It's the only way you're going to seal the border is with the military. So you're going to totally militarize the border because the police state that they've had down there for decades and decades clearly hasn't worked. And then he says that he was counseling Republicans to finish Trump's wall. Okay, so, and you know what that means, continually stealing people's property, some of which has been in the families for generations with eminent domain. Eminent domain stealing. I mean, that's quite a message to take to the American people. And then he says we need to evict every single illegal immigrant and send them back to their country of origin. Well, that's like 10 or 11 million people here that are here illegally. So the only way to ferret all those people out is there's going to be a reign of terror with the FBI, the ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, the Border Patrol, and snitches. You're going to need snitches to ferret all these people out. It's going to be a real reign of terror. That's quite a message to be sending to the American people as a presidential candidate. And what's kind of funny is that Michael at these debates takes great pride in saying, I'll be a Libertarian Party presidential candidate that's advocating anarchy. Well, my hunch is that not very many Americans out there love anarchy. I mean, inside the party, yes. But outside the party, there's not a big constituency of people that favor anarchy. But his position on anarchy is very interesting because he wants to abolish Congress, he wants to abolish the Supreme Court, he wants to burn up the Constitution, but keep the presidency so he can be president with this massive military and massive police state along the border. I mean, that's the Pinochet model. That's how General Pinochet ran, strong president, big military. And he also favors state government, sovereign powers, totalitarian-like powers, non-reviewable powers, including he wants the state governments to establish border controls around their entire states to prevent other people from other states coming in. Now, my hunch is that when you combine all this message of partial anarchy and domestic border controls, ending America's system of open borders domestically with anarchy, there's not a lot of people that are going to vote for this message, which might be reflected in the current polls where we're at 0%. At the other end of the spectrum is Chase Oliver. He'll be in your debate. He favors he calls the Ellis Island kind of system, which means the government controls the movements of people, but all the immigrants have to come through the inspection stations. And there were tremendous abuses at Ellis Island. I mean, women would be required to stand in a row before a panel of men and remove their blouses and their bras so that the men could check and see if their breasts had diseases. I mean, the immigrants hated this thing, hated it. But Chase wants to let in more immigrants. That's his plan, his reform plan. And in his debate with Senator Warnock, when he was running for U.S. Senate about a year and a half ago, Chase said, boy, the system's broken, the immigration system's broken. I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to work with a duopoly, I'm going to make them read the bills, and we're going to make this system work. We're going to streamline it. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. This is an inherently defective system. That socialism is an inherently defective system. I've heard reform plans for all my life. No reform plan's ever going to work. My favorite phrase is comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, every 4 years you hear this. Since I was a kid, you hear this system. Oh, the system needs reform. And the thing is that once you vest government with the power to control peaceful activity, you have to assume that your worst enemy is going to get a hold of that power, and the person with the worst plan is going to get it. It's not going to be your plan that's going to be adopted. And moreover, that when you have government saying, well, okay, we'll let in more people, let's say 90%, we're going to reject 10%. Well, the 10% are still going to try to come in. So you still need this massive police state. And there's another thing to consider. We often think about immigration as control on foreigners. It's actually a control on Americans, too. For example, if you cross over into Reynosa or Nuevo Laredo for an hour just to shop at the market and you come back, you have forfeited your rights, especially your right of privacy. If they say, drop your trousers, drop your underwear, bend over, we're going to check your body cavities, or lift up your dress and drop your underwear, we're going to check your body cavities, you have to comply because you have forfeited your rights under border controls, under this system. They now are forcing people to turn over their laptops and cell phones and divulge their password. If you don't divulge, you go to jail and you sit there and cool your heels till you're ready to divulge your password. This is what this system does. It destroys rights on both sides of the border. Why should a person who just goes to vacation, an American citizen goes to vacation in Cancun, why should he forfeit his rights just because he's gone outside the country? Where's the logic of that? So it's a bad message. And that's why I reject this message. It's a message that's inconsistent with liberty, with morality, with sound religious principles, economic principles. Now, there's people in the party who say, Jacob, it's really not the bad message we're putting out and have put out. It's that people don't know our message. If people knew our message, they would vote for us, Jacob. There's just no question that they would vote for us en masse. Well, I challenge that. I mean, you hear it like with the debates. Oh, Jacob, if we just got into the debates, we'd break out of this 0 to 1% syndrome. Or if we had $20 million, Jacob, to run our campaign, we could get our message out. And then people would vote for us en masse. Not so. And the proof of this is two of the guys that are going to be in your debate, and that's Chase Oliver and Mike Tremont. They performed a really good service in establishing the point that I'm making, that it's a bad message. It's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of getting into the debates. Chase ran for U.S. Senate there in Georgia just a year and a half ago with the same message that he's carrying into the campaign. That he wants to be the messenger for the Libertarian Party. He wants to carry his message as a presidential nominee. He took that message to the voters in Georgia through a fortuitous sequence of events. He got the most unbelievable publicity in the history of the party. He was going to be the deciding factor as to whether the two major party candidates were going to be in a runoff. Herschel Walker, the Republican, and Senator Raphael Warnock, the Democrat. And then Georgia was going to determine who controlled the Senate. So the entire nation was focused on this, especially the people in Georgia. And so Chase was the beneficiary of this. He got more publicity than any candidate in the history of this party. It was an incredible achievement. I mean, it was a first-class campaign that he ran. No question about that. But the amount of advertising was equivalent to around, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 million dollars. I mean, the Super Bowl ads cost, what, 7 million? Chase got like 100 times more publicity than that. You know, ABC, CNN, NBC, Washington Post, New York Times, the Wire services, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Wall Street Journal. I mean, it was incredible, all over the internet. I mean, Chase Oliver and Libertarian Party were splattered everywhere, all over the country, and especially in Georgia, where every single person was aware of this. So Chase got his message out like tenfold to the people of Georgia. And then he got into the debate with an incumbent U.S. Senator. Walker didn't show up, so Chase had half the time to get his message out. And what was that message? Well, it's the standard message, the message we run for 20 years. This amalgam of libertarian socialism, Republican light, and serfdom reform. Chase's platform was, 25-year plan for Social Security, opt-out plans. That, in fact, if you look at the South Carolina debate at my website, jacobforliberty.com, Chase was the most vociferous defender of how we have to continue this socialist program for one generation at least. And you know what's going to happen at the end of 25 years, which is defined as one generation. The 40-year-olds that will then be 65 say, wait a minute. Well, we're dependent on this money we put in. We have a right to get it back. And so it'll go on indefinitely. And who cares about a 25-year plan for freedom? That has no interest for me at all. I want freedom now in my lifetime, and I may not be around 25 years from now. But Chase takes this message of he wants to continue Social Security and Medicare. He was asked in the debate about Medicaid, and he says, well, I oppose the expansion, but he favors the continuation. He favors something called direct medical care as a reform, serfdom reform, welfare state reform. He's a premier proponent of school vouchers, school choice, charter schools as a way to improve the public school system. He wants to get libertarians elected to the school board. In the debate, he said, the immigration system's broken. He's going to reform it. He's going to fix it. Regulatory reform. He said that he would be a better proponent of small government than Herschel Walker, the Republican, and lower taxes, because he doesn't favor the abolition of the income tax. He wants to reform the IRS code, go through it line by line and delete the inefficient provisions. He wants a smaller Pentagon, smaller CIA, DEA, ATF, Homeland Security, Border Patrol, smaller. Really what I would call smaller tyranny, smaller oppression. So he took this message to the voters of Georgia, and he got his message out there. And at the end of this thing, 2%. Only 2%. Because there's no constituency out there, and he proved it. He didn't raise as much money as the other guys or spend as much money, but who cares? He got, tens of millions of dollars of free advertising. What's important is that you get your message to the voter, and that message cannot garner votes. And the same with Mike Tremont. And both these guys, you'll see in the debate, if you don't already know them, are the two of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. In fact, it's kind of interesting. We fight it out on the debate stage, but we've all become friends in this process. But there's no possibility that anybody voted against Chase or Mike because they thought, oh, that guy's a jerk or he's obnoxious or anything. No, their message cannot garner votes. That's why we're at 0%. That's why we only were at 1%. There's no constituency out there for this message. And Mike Tremont took his message out there to the voters in the 20th Congressional District of Florida, and first-class campaign. Gold New Deal, his program, wants to reform the monetary system. We have big disagreements, Mike and I, on his monetary reform plan. He wants to end the Fed and transfer the functions of the Fed to the Treasury Department, and then he wants the Treasury Department to increase the paper money supply. Both he and Chase favor the paper money supply that Franklin Roosevelt brought into existence unconstitutionally and illegally when he nationalized gold as part of the original New Deal. Well, as Mike's Gold New Deal, he doesn't want to restore the gold coin, silver coin standard. He wants to have the Treasury increase the paper money supply by an amount equal to the growth in the economy. Well, how do you measure this? I mean, what measurement of money do you use? M1, M2, M3, the monetary base? What if they miss the target? Do they go to jail? Reform, reform, reform. What I'm saying is, let's separate money in the state entirely. Okay, let's run a genuine, pure, 100% libertarian campaign. Reject Republican light, reject libertarian socialism, and serfdom reform. Separate money in the state, education in the state, healthcare in the state, economy in the state, and make the competent case to our fellow Americans for libertarianism, pure libertarianism. Dismantle the national security state. Don't just cut it in half. You don't reform or reduce cancer. If you can excise it, you get rid of it and restore a limited government republic with just a basic military force like our country was founded on. And dismantle every infringement on freedom and make that case. Open borders, dismantle Social Security and Medicare. Now, another interesting question there at the Colorado debate was, what do you think is the cause, or what should we do about the discord in this party? And my answer was, look, a blind man can see what's going on. You've got, just a year ago, you had right-wing elements in the party hoping that DeSantis would come in and save us, or Vivek Ramaswamy would come in and save us as their nominee. And now they've shifted to Robert Kennedy Jr. That, he's going to come and save us. He's ballot access, big votes. And for me, this guy, it would be the disaster. It's like rent a party. We're just renting our party to get votes. It'd be the ultimate of the abandonment of our principles. But there's actually a logic behind why libertarians are supporting this guy. Because if you look at his message, it's not significantly different from the message of my opponents and what has become the standard message. He's a firm believer in Social Security and Medicare, okay, and Medicaid, other welfare state programs. He's a firm believer in public schooling. I doubt if he favors vouchers, but he might be open to them. He favors immigration controls. He wants to seal the border, just like our standard message has become, where government's controlling things. So there's a logic behind libertarian supporters. This guy's saying, well, look, if we're going to run the standard message, we might as well run it with this guy who can garner votes. Well, that's why we need to focus on the message itself. And what, again, like I started out asking, what message do you want carried to the American people on your behalf? Is it this Kennedy-like standard message that has become the standard for our party? Or do you want to go into battle with just pure libertarian principles? We are libertarians, okay? We're not Democrats. We're not Republicans. We're not Democrat lights or Republican lights. I've said for 30 some odd years, our principles are our greatest asset. But the opponents have said, no, they've ingrained in the party that our principles are liabilities or albatrosses. And I say pure nonsense on that. 20 years ago, I ran for U.S. Senate in Virginia with this package of pure libertarian principles, a campaign of principle, okay? And I was running against one of the most popular governors in the history of the state, John Warner, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He had been married to the famous actress Elizabeth Taylor. And this was right after the 9/11 attacks. I was saying that the attacks were motivated by U.S. foreign policy, which Ron Paul, of course, would say some years later in that famous debate with Giuliani. So I knew I wouldn't get one Republican vote, and I didn't care. I didn't target Republicans for votes. The Democrats were not running anybody, but I knew I wouldn't get any votes from them. I'm calling for the repeal of Social Security, Medicare, public schooling, open borders. And I didn't care about that either. All the Democrat votes, I'm sure, went to the LaRouche candidate who was in the race. So I ran this campaign just like the same principles I'm enunciating here. I ended up with 7% of the statewide vote. This is 20 years ago, proving that there's a constituency out there that loves this package of principles that we stand for. And I have no doubts that constituency has doubled or tripled over the last 20 years. And that's why I keep saying that if we run a campaign with this message, we have the potential of breaking out to 10 to 15%, double what I did 20 years ago, because that constituency is still out there. Now, one of the biggest honors I've ever gotten in my entire life was I went into the office of a man named John O. Peterson. He was the pastor of the Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. Very prominent man. He got elected to the African American Hall of Fame. And I went in there, and he didn't know me from Adam, and I didn't have any money. I mean, I was running a bare bones campaign, but I was targeting blacks in Virginia, primarily on the racist government program known as the drug war. This is the most racist government program since segregation. And I was telling people this. I'd find out where the concerts were that blacks were attending. I'd go while they were standing in line, go and talk to them. I went to picnics. And I met with Pastor Peterson. He agreed to meet with me. He didn't know me from Adam. And I said, Pastor Peterson, this is what I stand for. Open borders. What we're doing there on the border with people, it violates the second greatest commandment that our Lord Jesus Christ enunciated. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. It's a horror story. And I oppose the war on drugs, the most racist government program since segregation. I want to end Social Security, Medicare, the entire welfare state. It's created a mindset of dependency among the American people. I want to bring all the troops home. The Vietnam War was a disaster. They were conscripting blacks and to go fight and die for freedom and then come back to a segregated society, some freedom. Well, at the end of this conversation, which was very lengthy, he asked me a lot of questions. He said, Mr. Hornberger, I'm going to endorse your candidacy. He knew I couldn't win, but he wrote out a letter of endorsement. He says, take this to every black minister in the state. You tell him I'm endorsing you. And I did. And to this day, I have no doubts that the lion's share of that 7% came from blacks in Virginia, but also Hispanics, because I was going into Hispanic neighborhoods here in Northern Virginia saying, spread the word. There's a Senate candidate that's going to open the borders. We're going to free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. And that's what I'm saying is, in this race, I want to take this message to different groups of people that the party is not accustomed to targeting. Migrant families, blacks. The black vote is up for grabs. The 50% of people who don't vote, that's a gold mine of votes for us. Because you can tell a large percentage of them say, what's the point? It's a crooked, corrupt system, the welfare state, the warfare state. All of us, they're not going to vote for reformers. They're not going to vote for Republican lights. They're not going to vote for libertarian socialism. But they will vote, I am convinced, they will come out and vote for a candidate that is standing for pure libertarian principles of dismantling the welfare state, dismantling the warfare state. And then there's people suffering the ravages of inflation. That's my fourth group. The people barely making ends meet. Those are our voters when they say we're making the case for sound money, not some monetary reform plan, but instead the separation of money in the state. Not even the gold standard, which was a remarkable system for sound money, but let the market decide this, make that case. And in this regard, my friend Lars Mapstead, he'll be in your debate. He has a plan that says replace the income tax with a national sales tax of 18%, all the way up to 23%. He calls it the fair tax. He says go to fairtax.org, learn all about this. And if I were there in that debate, I would go head to head with Lars, and he knows I do in every debate when he brings this up. That would be a disaster. To send out a message to the poor people, the poorer classes in America who are struggling to make ends meet primarily because of inflation, to say we're going to abolish the income tax, protect the rich, the multimillionaires, to saddle with a regressive tax the welfare burden on you, the poor, because it is a regressive tax, be a disaster. You could kiss every single vote of every single person in the lower classes goodbye. And if you think you're going to garner the multimillionaires vote, think again. They're going to vote for Trump. Or the left ones are going to vote for Biden. And why 18 or 23%? Why so high? Well, because Lars believes in this off-ramp business of Social Security and Medicare, that we got to have an off-ramp for 25 years. And I mean, right there, you're looking at $80 trillion in liabilities there. That's like more than double the national debt of $34 trillion. So you obviously need this massive amount on any reform plan, even an opt-out plan. You got to collect the money to fund the people for 25 years. So even the young people that are supposedly opting out, you still have to keep taxing them. That's the hidden little secret here. Not to mention the fact that the opt-out plan entails forcing young people to invest money in government-approved accounts. Well, totally contrary to freedom. Our job is to lead America to freedom in this campaign. I mean, in this party. I mean, that's our job. And in the process, garner a large number of votes. And it is my contention that if we take a campaign of principle to the American people, reject libertarian socialism, reject serfdom reform, reject Republican light, and run a campaign of pure principles, our principles, open borders, dismantle socialism entirely, dismantle the national security state, restore a limited government republic, separate healthcare in the state, money in the state, education in the state, economy in the state, we can achieve 10 to 15% breakout. Double what I did 20 years ago. But most important, this is how we lead America to freedom. I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. Y'all have a great convention, and thank you very much.